feel it's going to be on your final exam. We are doing Art of the Americas today, and tomorrow we'll do Africa. I was looking before you guys got in. The Art of the Americas section is longer than I thought it would be, so it might spill over in tomorrow a little bit. I don't know if we'll get to North America, but there's only like 3 things on North America anyways. But we'll see how it goes. I do want to give you guys a little preview of your final though, like I promised I would give. It's 10 questions, short essay. Very similar to all of the other quizzes that you've taken in class so far. Question number 1 says, identify this object. Heads up, we're talking about that one today. It's one of the first objects we're going to talk about. How does this object communicate beliefs or values associated with its culture? It's a temple. So there's a hint there. And on the temple are images of one of the gods. So, it's a religious temple. There's a little preview to the answer, or the way your answers might want to sound. Something like that. If you go a different direction, though, it'll probably still be fine because it's a short essay. I do like those. I do like those answers. Sometimes on these short essays, you guys go a completely different route from what I expect, and I kind of enjoy it because it's like, oh, I didn't think of that. Good job. Question number 2, identify the object. What kind of religious or political beliefs does? No, I misspelled that. I need to do editing. Does this object convey? And how? So this one is not going to be, well, there's a little bit of religious iconography in it, but it's more political. And we're talking about this one today too. The next question, another identify this object. What kind of individuals are being depicted and what activities are they engaging in? It's not a pleasant activity. You'll remember this one though. You will, I promise. I can't get it off my mind. Pretty interesting activity. Oh, we're talking about this one today. Yeah. A good chunk of these we're talking about today. Describe the style employed by the artist. The artist for this one doesn't have a name. So yeah. Describe the style though. Is it natural or abstract, geometric, or stylized? Yeah. You guys could probably already answer that. Just looking at it. What kind of visual impact does this have on the viewer? This is all opinion. You shouldn't miss this one. Opinion. I liked that question. Although if you say it's geometric, it is not. I mean, it's kind of square, but or abstract, that would also be probably not a good answer. But yeah. Consider the size of this object and its location. What kind of impact might these factors have on original viewers? What kind of experience would the object have facilitated? So this is one we might not get to today, as it is in North America, and I'm not sure if we'll get all the way there. But it is very large, obviously. You can only take it in from the air if you want to see all of it. So even thinking about the size in terms of today, you can probably get a feel for the overall impact it might have had on viewers when they first saw it, as it is huge. Once again, this one is more of an opinion question. There's not a specific answer for it at all. I mean, even the shape of this is speculation. So there's not a specific answer. Pretty much just your opinion. So far, I don't think this is a bad final. It's a pretty good one, especially in comparison to my art appreciation one. I'm mean on that one a little, just a little. Is there an overall African style? Some of you might know the answer to that already. Is there an overall African religion, culture, or people? Probably not an overall African style. This is a yes or no, by the way. You just have to write yes or no. We will not get to this one today, but yeah. I mean, if you want to write more than yes or no, you can, but you don't have to. Just yes or no. I could have made this multiple choice, just yes or no. I might make it multiple choice, just yes or no. Yeah, I probably will. You don't want me to?
I'll just like copy and paste like something huge from Wikipedia and then like have an answer at the bottom for it.
That's cool.
Okay.
I might not read it. No.
I would probably really
Yeah, I thought of you and Grace. You and Grace, you two would be like, no, because da 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 da.
Well, okay, but also most people are like answering full sentences.
Yeah. So I'll probably just switch this one to a multiple choice yes or no, because you really don't need.
True.
Because the next questions you're going to elaborate more. But are there any apparent favored materials in African art? If so, why do you think these materials are favored? I always loved these questions on tests because it kind of gives you the answer in the second part. Like, why would I ask that? Remember, I just get these from the AP exam, by the way. Well, I tweak them a little bit, like a lot. Like the first half, all of those pictures I tweaked. This I kind of tweaked too. When I was taking art history, my professor made me take the AP exam so that their scores wouldn't look so low. Even though I didn't need to take the AP, I'd already like gotten credits for the class. Did not need to take the AP exam. But she made me, and I didn't realize it. She told me in class that morning, she's like, hey, I need you to come on this day to take this exam. She didn't tell me why. So I was freaking out. I was like, I have to take a test? I didn't know I had to take a test. What? And then afterwards, she was like, yeah, I just wanted you to take that so our scores would go up. How did you do that? I was so serious on that test. I spent 2 hours on it. I was freaking out the whole time.
But how many questions were on it?
I don't remember. I do not remember at all.
Because I spent 2 hours on the first quiz. So.
Oh, yeah. There were more than that. I think but they weren't essay, they were multiple choice. There was an essay question at the very end, as AP exams usually are. But you're only allowed to fill up that page. You're not allowed to add to pages on AP exams. You're only allowed to use the space that they give you, which is 2 pages, and they're like the double wide line. Yeah. So it didn't take me long to fill that up. The multiple choice, I think there were 50 questions. But yeah, I was freaking out. I don't know what made me reminisce on that. I'd forgotten that happened, but yeah. Next question, in African art, which were the most utilitarian artworks discussed? So utilitarian means like useful, like you would use it for a purpose to accomplish a task. There are a couple of artifacts that have a function in African art. Yeah, one of them is like, for example, the last artifact we're going to talk about is a salt cellar. It held salt. That would be an example of the utilitarian artwork. Just because that word is kind of confusing. Utilitarian. We don't use that. Question 9, in African art, is there any art made for its own sake? So do artists make art for their own expression, or are they making it because someone's paying them to make it? And the final question, how do specific classes represented in African art objects relate to particular belief systems or socio-political structures? Is there any relation at all? That's a hard question. Save the best one for last. So are there any African art objects that represent class structures? Probably. Are they related to religion or political structures? Yeah. So the last time we looked at art that really specified social or class structures or religious beliefs, we were looking at a lot of hierarchic scale stuff. That would be an example of an artwork that really showcases, yeah, different levels. So does African art do anything like that at all? That's a little simpler to understand, probably. So, do you guys think that after today and tomorrow you'll be able to take this test? Okay. And now you know going forward some of the things you should probably look out for as we're going through objects. Okay. Oh, did I do that? Oh no, I didn't. Okay. No, I did. Oh no. Oh no, there it is. Oh, like, where did I put it? Where did it go? Okay. Today we are going to start with native arts of the Americas before 1300. Both these chapters, Africa and America, they're a bit weird. I think you probably experienced the same thing when you were going through the Asian chapters. It covers a really large period of time in a very short amount of pages. Yeah. Which is pretty typical for your standard westernized art history class. If we were teaching this class like in China, it'd be the opposite, reversed. But yeah, it's just preference, I suppose. We are very much fixated on European ideals in America. So we idealize and love things like Greek art and Roman art, so we spend a lot of time on them. It's not to say that there's not a lot of art. It's just that we either A, don't understand it, or B, don't know enough about those people to really comprehend anything, which is exactly the case for Africa. With Africa, we don't really understand the people or the cultures enough to be able to expand on them. We know a little bit more about art for the Americas, which is why this is a bit longer of a section in comparison to Africa. But so ancient Americas, we're starting in BCE time. You did the same thing when you're going over Asian chapters, and when we went over the Islamic chapter, we started with the very beginning of Islam. So we're starting with the very beginning of the Americas. Luckily with Africa, we won't have to do that because we already kind of talked about early African art when we went over prehistoric art. But yes, people in the Americas began settling after crossing Beringia or the Bering Strait a long, long time ago. Because these people were nomadic, a lot of their art was portable, which we will be seeing when we get to talking about the Inuit people in Alaska. Their art was very portable. They moved a lot. However, there were people that did settle and form cities. This chapter is primarily dedicated to them. We are focusing on the time period between the formation of these cities and European settlement. So we are not getting into Spanish conquest when we're talking about Central and South America, and we're not getting into European, like British, French, Netherlands conquest when we're talking about North America and Canada. Before that, as I said, some of these groups did form cities. These cities did have high levels of social complexity, meaning they had leaders, people that worked for the leaders, people at the very, very bottom of the social caste system. Some of these societies are quite brutal, but also very interesting. We can divide the art into pre-classic, classic, and post-classic, as well as intermediate, and that's exactly how we're going to be going through these today. If you don't quite get all these dates down, they're on the transition slide into that section. If you care about the dates at all, it's kind of nice to have a little bit of a context, though. I always thought it was interesting. So African art does the same thing. They divide it with these terms pre-classic, classic, and post-classic, which are like Greek. How we divide Greece as well. So we stick to these European ideals even when discussing non-European cultures. It's very strange to me. Your book doesn't touch on that, but I found it very odd. And I remember when I was learning about this the first time, I thought it was really odd as well. Yeah. I would like to just say both of these chapters, as well as the chapters that you guys just did over Asia, this is looking into their society from a white European perspective. Yeah, keep that in mind going forward. I think we grasped that probably. So we are starting off in Mesoamerica, and then we'll go into South America and then North America. Mesoamerica, I learned is more like Central America, because now they're calling it Meso. Whatever. It's the region comprised of Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and the Pacific region of El Salvador. So we are talking about pre-Columbian civilizations such as the Olmec, Classic, Veracruz, Jalisco, Colima, and all of those others. I listed them because those are all of the ones that we're talking about. You will see their names pop up as we go through transition slides. You don't have to write them all. I don't know why I wrote them all, but other than I was fascinated by how many there were and are. These cultures, they don't really share a commonality at all. They don't share similar geography or geographical setup. The terrain varies greatly in that region of Mesoamerica. They don't share a common language. A lot of the languages we haven't even successfully translated yet. We have translated the Mayan language because there's people that still speak it today, which is very helpful. They do, however, funny enough, share a common religion that is thought to have been picked up by the Olmec people, which are the first people we're talking about, and then spread throughout the rest of Central and parts of South America. So similar gods and deities, a lot of them are nature and land gods. There's a few that have a particular way that they're always represented in all of these different cultures, which is kind of interesting. They also have similar rights and social structures. A good chunk of the people that we're talking about today, they were kind of militant, not all of them. Some of them were very militant, and they liked to conquer other people and take those people in as slaves and sacrifice them. And that is the right that they share in common, human sacrifice and bloodletting. Those are common rights. But that was their way to really give gifts to their deities, was through blood. It's cool. Would I ever want to experience it? Heck no. But it's kind of cool to read about. And creepy. Cool. But yes, some of the other things they share in common are arts. As I mentioned, there are specific deities that are supposed to be represented a specific way. So the art forms are going to translate from culture to culture, which is bizarre to think about, that they picked up the same religion and art style, but not language. Whatever. To each. How to spy. But I mean, if one culture is worshiping these gods and they're successful, I could see why other people might want to like worship them too. It makes sense. And they're like all nature gods. Which also makes sense. The primary god, of course, is rain and wind, having to do with growing stuff. We are, like I said, starting off with the pre-classic period, so that is the Olmec and I used to be able to say this word, Teotihuacan. There we go. Yeah. Some days I do great, and other days I'm like, nope, brain cannot do. It's okay. It's only a word that I'm going to have to say a million times today. I'll get it eventually. My art history professor with this name, she would always just say the tea people. We're gonna try though. We're gonna try. I usually don't have issues with that one, but oh well. The Olmec people are considered the mother culture, and that is where we are starting. Most of the religious beliefs, art styles are birthed from them, as well as the social structures of their civilization, which is why they're considered the mother culture. There's a few other cultures that we'll come across today that like to also claim that title. We'll get to them. Obviously, this is the oldest one. This is where we're starting. So, yeah. You can figure out which one's the oldest. Most of the social strong constructs, like I said, are traced back to the Olmec people. They did have a hierarchy, and their living arrangements were based off of their social rank. So, of course, the kings, as they did have kings, lived in the nicest area, followed by the priests and the commanding officials. And then, of course, in the crappy areas or slum areas were the poor people or lesser members of society who were, like today, usually the people that did the groundwork, like growing food. Been around for a long time, guys. Not new. And you remember this. It's not been that long. They are known for creating this particular form of art. This is the main thing that we have from the Olmec people. It's these colossal heads. They are huge. There are many of them. Originally, people thought these were supposed to be deities. Now we have learned that those are rulers. They're the heads of rulers of the Olmec people. This basalt that this is made of was transported for 60 miles through swampland. Impressive. Just to get to their city. These people did live in a city style. Later, when we get to the Mayans and the Incans, they didn't so much. They had some cities, but not everyone lived there. Now, as I said here, I get the sense that it evokes like a power. This is a power move in my mind. That's my opinion. But if you remember your test question, it asks you what you think of the style and what do you think its purpose was for people when they saw it? Like, what do you think the emotion it evoked was? So first off, what do you think style is? Do you think it's natural or abstract? Natural. Do you think it's geometric or stylized? It's a little stylized, yeah. As the facial features are a little smushed in a little bit, not too much. All of them have that helmet on their head. It's a traditional warrior's helmet for the Olmec people. Now, what do you think? Because like I said, there's a lot of these. What do you think some visitor to the Olmec city would think when they saw this? Yeah. Yeah, and that was the vibe, like I said, power move.
Like I've been down, like in like the jungle down there. Like that stuff's crazy. It's like you don't see anything, but then like you'll come across like a little. Yeah, a lot of these civilizations, after they were abandoned, the jungle and terrain just took over. And it's incredible. Yeah, and it is really cool. Originally, that would not have been the case. They would have had that land cleared out. But of course, when you abandon the city, nature takes over. But yeah, I do think it's really cool. I've had a lot of friends go down to Central and South America to see this stuff and send pictures, and it's really impressive. Like, you don't know anything's there. Yeah. And all of a sudden, bam. You never see it. Not even from the sky. It's crazy. Another thing that we have from the Olmec people are small figurines, such as this one, as well as cave paintings. We aren't going to look at cave paintings because we've already seen a lot of cave paintings. If you remember back to the prehistoric section. Same with Africa. We're not going to spend time looking at cave paintings because we've seen cave paintings. This is a piece of jade. We don't know where it came from, as there's not any like close jade resources for them to have gotten this from. It was buried under a courtyard used for ceremonial purposes, like sacrificing people. There were quite a few of these buried in that courtyard. We don't know the purpose of it. It does illustrate the maize deity, or at least the people that we consider it the maize deity, the jaguar, or weird jaguar. It's a human jaguar person. He's in the middle of transforming, and this is where we begin to see duality. Duality, two sides. Meso and South American art is filled with duality or double meaning. This is the first culture that we talked about that does this. And by duality, I mean here, quite literally, there's a human jaguar.
They felt that their deities were human, but also spiritual and had multiple forms, and they liked to show both of those forms in the artwork and showcase that duality, human and nature coming together. And we're going to see it pop up a lot. This is called a Celt. You won't need to know, well, you know what's on your test. You won't need to remember the word Celt, but it's a small axe-shaped little figure. It's not an axe itself, but it's the shape of an axe. You would not want to use jade as an axe. It will break. I always thought this one looked interesting. Mostly because he's supposed to look like his teeth are bared, like a jaguar, but it just looks like his lips flipped up. It's weird. And so much detail is put into the head, but not the body. Yeah, I feel like it's another one of those, like a long time ago, we talked about people that use the natural shape of the stone. I feel like this might be another case of that, and they just polished it and shaped it a little bit and then etched those portions in. But I don't know, maybe not. That does take us to the T people, Teotihuacan, which is a very, very large city. The most successful large city of this time period. In fact, if it is as populated as most historians speculate, which was 125 to 200,000 residents, this would have been the 6th largest city in the world at that time. In the middle of Central America, not where you'd think the 6th largest city in the world would be. But it was really impressive. It's so impressive that most other cultures that visited that city or saw it in the region copied the format. The format being, this is going to sound a little repetitive, the temple structures and ceremonial venues were in the center with the palace right next to it. Typical city here. It does have several wards that existed in the city. For example, the Zapotec people, which was a tribe that lived in the city, was in the western ward. I can't remember directions. I'm having to cheat. And the Veracruz people, which we are going to be talking about soon, classic Veracruz people, they lived in the eastern wards. Because there were multiple people groups and cultures living in this one city together, which is crazy because you don't really think of that happening in ancient times. But because of that, each ward has its own style as they took on the styles of the culture that lived there. Neat to me. So they would do things like use different murals in those sections for that people in that people's style. As most of Teotihuacan did have wall murals throughout the entire city. It's a cool place. I get hyped up on this one. When the Aztecs first visited the city, they did call it the Palace of the Gods. By the point the Aztecs visited, the city was abandoned. Nobody lived there. Because of that, the Aztecs did name a bunch of stuff, but they didn't actually know the purpose of that. For example, there's one road that they called the Alley of the Dead or something like that, Road of the Dead. We'll see it in a second. It does not have anything to do with dead people. But yeah, they named things and nobody was there, so they were just naming stuff. Spaniards do that too. We'll come across some of those later. Now, there are a lot of pictures of this one. I even included some pictures that were in your book because, like I said, I got hyped up. I do get hyped up on this one. I think it's amazing. Here is the Pyramid of the Sun. The Pyramid of the Sun is the largest pyramid in the city,
And it is comprised of a stepped temple platform. What that means is there's just different levels of, well, smaller steps on top of each other to create a pyramid. The last thing that we talked about that was similar to this were the stepped pyramids of Egypt. Obviously not influenced by each other because they didn't know what the Egyptians were doing and vice versa. This does have a ramp causeway that would lead to the top. At the top, originally, there was a wooden structure for, well, worship to take place for the priests. Obviously, we don't have worship. Obviously, we don't have the wooden portion anymore. Even the stone part's starting to fall apart. This is just a portion of the temple area. There are many more temples within the city. We're going to look at another one in a second. But the reason why they chose to do a stepped platform was to echo the mountain in the background. I chose a picture of that kind of, you can see the mountain, it's a little foggy. But that's the reason why all of these Central and South American cultures do pyramids. It's because they're trying to echo the mountains as they consider the mountains to be life-giving sources. A lot of their rivers and springs come from, well, underground sources under the mountains, as well as lava and precious metals and stone. So they really respect mountains and revere it, and they wanted to showcase them and worship them in their architecture. So very different reason from the Egyptians. Egyptians doing it to show off power of kings. These guys showing off their devotion to the gods. This particular temple was built on top of a cave complex. That's not normal. So don't consider that a standard. There's some of them that we're going to talk about that do actually have people buried inside of them. That's not normal either. That's a rare case. There's some of them that do have dead people, like sacrifice next to them. That's a little, yeah, so more than a few. But this one is built on top of a cave complex. Inside of the cave were a bunch of offerings. Not just human offerings, though, but also tangible offerings. And humans are tangible. Different kinds of tangible around. You get it. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I think you do. I think you understand what I'm talking about. I just call it even not tangible. Oops. Yeah. Now, I told you. I told you. This one creeps me out. This is the only temple that we're going to talk about that has children buried. But there were many, many children that were sacrificed to this temple, and they were buried in the four corners of the temple. A lot of you are making a really sad face right now. This is the only one. The others do have people sacrificed, but not small children. And we're talking like babies, really small kids, which is terrifying and disgusting. But they believed that that was how they would continue to prosper as a society, was to sacrifice to the mountain that the temple represents, that is the life-giving source. When I'm going through these, I have to put myself in their mindset. Okay, this is what they were taught. This is what they believed. This is what the city was so prosperous, they thought that it was working. So if I think about it, it makes sense. Does it make it okay? No. But it makes sense that they would think that. I think it's because today we have more scientific knowledge on how those things work, but they didn't know those things. So it's a different time, a different society. Yeah.
I still get shocked though when I see it. My little European self.
I would be concerned or shocked.
I always think about like the moms. I mean, most likely they were using children of people that they captured and enslaved, not like their citizens, but the poor parents. Although the parents probably had a similar fate. So, told you, Avenue of the Dead. So the Avenue of the Dead actually links the Pyramid of the Moon, which is smaller. I think I might have a picture of it. Yeah. The pyramid, no, I did not. It's identical to this, just smaller. But it links the Pyramid of the Moon to the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. I can say that one. Quetzalcoatl is the one that's on your test right here. Quetzalcoatl was a major god for them. He is always characterized from all of these cultures as a feathered serpent, which sounds bizarre, but it's a snake with like, you know how lions have manes? It's a snake with feathers as a mane. So the one that looks like the snake with feathers is here. So Quetzalcoatl is a repetitive motif on this particular temple, and we aren't sure who the other deity is here, but it is a person with barred teeth. Quetzalcoatl, though, he was one of the main gods because he was in charge of rain. Once again, these people are very concerned with crops, as they should be. They should be very concerned with crops. So they would frequently sacrifice and pray to and give offerings to the god of rain. That's cool. As I said, they did sacrifice a lot. There remains of 100 sacrifices found in this temple. Not quite as many. Also not children. Does that make it okay? No. But makes it a little bit more digestible in our brains today. Once again, same with this one. There's a ramp leading to the top. Originally, there would have been a wooden structure at the top. This one does not have a cave underneath it. It does not have anything underneath it. It's just a bunch of stones piled on top of each other. In fact, you can see the underlying stones. The interesting thing about a lot of these temples, especially the ones that don't have anything underneath them, is it's legit rocks piled on top of each other, and then they would put fashioned bricks that they shaped on the facade. The rest of it's just rubble. You can see the rubble portion. So what was the question about this one? It was religion, right?
How does this object communicate beliefs or values associated with its culture?
So how does it communicate beliefs or values? How does this temple function to do that? So the sacrifices. What else?
Sacrifice to the god of nature.
Mm-hmm. How does the temple like specifically relate to that religion though?
The face.
The sculptural reliefs, yeah. So there's a couple of different answers for that one that you can go with, or you can write them both. It's up to you. We aren't done though. I got a close up because I wanted you guys to be able to see that these were originally painted. And I thought it was pretty cool. Plus, it's nice to see a clear image of, well, Quetzalcoatl. I wish that we knew who the other god was, but we do not. But he's described as a scaly creature with a long snout and bared teeth, or barred teeth, depending on how you want to say that. It reminds me of creatures that I used to make with my Legos, though. It's very blocky. Yeah, we aren't done yet. So as I mentioned, this entire city is covered in relief paintings. This is one of the relief paintings. We aren't exactly sure of the name of this goddess, but she is all throughout the city. So she must be a fairly important goddess. This is just one of the relief paintings. They're, well, not relief paintings, but frescoes of her from the Tila apartment complex, which was just a house. But like I said, she's on all of the alleys on the Avenue of the Dead, which once again was named by the Aztecs. It's not actually dead, but I mean, they did sacrifice a lot of people. Maybe it's aptly named. But she is on both sides of that road, which is the biggest road in the city that links those two temples together. One temple's on one side, the other big, thick road. But she is lining both of those. It's an interesting portrayal of a goddess. This is the first old culture that we've seen someone do a direct frontal positioning of a human. Most of them, if you remember, do profile views. This one's straight on. She is obviously not natural. She's a bit more abstract. And a lot more emphasis is placed on her headdress than her actual body. So here we have her face, her body is here. She is standing on top of a temple. That's not actually her legs. It looks like her legs, but it's not. And of course, we have her large feathered headdress. We imagine that she is, of course, an earth or nature goddess, as most of their deities were. So that's not really. Like all of them are nature related, so come on now. Oh, in case you were wondering about her necklace or headdress, all of these swirling patterns are human hearts. Well, that's what it's supposed to be. It doesn't really look like a human heart, but that's what it's supposed to be. Well, she's not the only one. It's a trend. Human body parts. Yeah. Now, that does take us from the pre-classic people to the classic people. Classic people in Mesoamerica include the Mayans. If you'll notice, there's multiple people groups listed under the Mayans. That's because the Mayan people did not live in cities. They were not all congregating into one massive city, although if they did, it would have been cool. Instead, they had multiple small towns, I would say, versus a city. In each town, they would have a temple and a palace and their own setup, but on a much smaller scale than the last group that we talked about. And of course, classic Veracruz. We already kind of talked about Veracruz, but we're going to specifically focus on them now. Teotihuacan does come to an end. We don't know why. Well, most speculate that the town caught fire. Yeah. And of course, these are going to come to an end eventually too. Although, like I said earlier, some Mayan and people that can link their ancestry to the Mayans do still exist, which is very convenient for us because they still know the language. Now, the classic Mayans, you don't have to write all of this. This is just a little background. Just sit and enjoy. They very much pull from the Olmec and the Teotihuacan people, especially, like I said, for the city structure. They have the temples in the center with the palace and then smaller apartments around. And they too had a hierarchic system copying the last two people groups that we talked about identically, with the king at the top, followed by the priests, and then the officials, and then the attendants, and then, well, everyone else. But, yeah. And of course, at the bottom were the slaves. They did love to depict their rulers, which is something that sets them apart quite a bit from the last two groups. Well, I mean, the Olmec depicted their rulers, but these guys really depict their rulers. So much so that we are able to figure out who was ruling when and what they accomplished, which is kind of cool. Therefore, a lot of their art is going to revolve around politics rather than, well, some of it revolves around religion, but a lot of it's politically linked. They are pretty famous and well known for developing like math and studying planetary movement. In fact, some of the structures we're going to talk about today are designed to reflect astronomy. They even have an astronomy tower. Kind of cool. Very invested in the calendar as well. Out of all of the ancient peoples that we've talked about, their calendar most closely resembles today's calendar as far as like accuracy. And a lot of their structures also relate to the calendar. For example, 365 steps. I'm not joking. There's a lot of structures that have exactly 365 stairs, which is interesting. So they care about interesting things: calendar, math, planets, and rulers. And like I said, they don't have a single city with power. They have multiple cities that have power struggles. So, yeah. Weirdly enough, the Mayans, after their civilizations collapse, some of them continue to go on building temples, even though there's not a city anymore. Dedication to religion, yes.
Very cool.
Yeah, they are cool people. I spent a lot of time on them.
I got to climb through like
Yeah.
a lot of ruins,
There's a lot left.
a whole bunch.
We have the most from this culture out of the ones that we're talking about today. So we are starting off with the Copan people. This one's on your side. Just a reminder. This is Steely D that's portraying the 13th ruler. See, I told you, we even know specific rulers because of the way they really were dedicated to illustrating them. We even have his name. I'm not going to say Waxaclajun Uba Kawi'i. Yeah. But he is very individualized. If you look at the other steles of these people from Copan, as they did make it dashy for every single ruler, he's different looking from the others. Usually they would adorn them with some sort of iconography to relate to what they accomplished or did not accomplish as rulers, such as his elaborate headdress, which is covered in snakes. He's also holding a snake bar. Snakes for the Mayans are symbols of sacred authority, relating him back to being a king. There's another people group that we're going to talk about later that snakes are not sacred authority. They symbolize something else. So don't get that mixed up. He's also wearing a very expensive ornamented kilted sandals. That's not something a regular old Joe could wear. That was meant for people in high society like kings. He is idealized and eternally youthful. He did get kind of old before he was decapitated. He had his head cut off. Yeah. See, I love the Mayans because we know so much about them because we can translate their stuff. But he was decapitated by, his name's in your book, but a ruler that ended up vying for power and taking over briefly after him. Ruler 13, though, is considered to be a very prosperous, well thought of ruler, which I think translates in the fact that they did depict him as youthful and rich and with the snakes that symbolize authority. They didn't have to do that. So he was pretty well liked by the people. Now the question for this, I remember, had something to do with politics. Don't quite remember it. I guess I can go back to it. I think it was questioned. Right. Yeah. What religious or political beliefs? And how? This one's not so much religious. Like I said earlier, it's more political. So it kind of has to do with what I said earlier of the Mayan people really loving to use their art to portray the rulers and using their art to show off the ruler's accomplishments and how they felt about that ruler. And of course, yeah, that's what I like to think of when I'm doing this, or even Rome. Rome was very invested in portraying their rulers specific ways to make you think certain things about them. That's the whole purpose of this as well. Of course, a very different way than the Romans did, but it still is meant to do the same thing. It's meant to make you think he's a great ruler, he has sacred authority, he's powerful, he's rich, he's youthful. We like him. Now we're going to get into the architecture. This one's Tikal, different Mayan group from Copan. This is one of those temples that most tourists go to from the Mayan people. Of course, another stepped pyramid. This one does not have a wooden structure at the top. It has a stone structure. It is more vertical than the last ones we looked at. The last one definitely looked very much like a mountain. This one's just tall. Tikal itself, the city covered 75 square miles and served as the religious center for 75,000 people. Not all 75,000 people lived there. They would go there for religious ceremonies. Yeah.
It's everywhere.
Just like the last one, this one was also originally painted. And a king was buried in it. So a little bit more like the Egyptians on this one. It also had to do with, of course, religion, but this one was more on the political side. You're really wanting to go there. But the Mayans, I always feel like they are more concerned with politics than religion. They're like, we'll be religious, but we're also going to use the opportunity to show off the government's power. Some more to call. This is a close-up of the roof comb. So this structure right here, most of their temples do have roof combs, which combs always make me think of roosters. Because the thing on a rooster's head is called a comb. Anyways, there is relief sculpture on top of that comb dedicated to the ruler that is buried in that mausoleum. So once again, using art as a political means to celebrate a ruler. Of course, most of this is deteriorated quite badly. Now on to our next Mayan group, the Bonampak people. This one's really interesting.
to me anyways, I don't know. As it illustrates a pretty typical ceremony of a new prince being born or coming into power. It was quite celebrated to have male heirs in this people group. So much so that most of the time they would paint murals. The Mayans did a wonderful job there. They painted murals, narrative scenes of a lot of activities that took place beyond just the ceremony of, well, welcoming a prince. But here they are welcoming the new prince, and everyone is coming to pay homage to the king or lord, Chan Muwan. And we aren't just paying homage here. We're still in Mesoamerica, guys. So the homage is human sacrifice. So here at the top, you can pretty well figure out who the king is. He's the one that's dressed the nicest, and he's also separate from everyone else. You might notice that unlike Teotihuacan, these people are not using frontal positioning. They're using profile and composite view. Well, he's kind of in frontal position. He's also the most important figure. So a bit different, a bit more likening to Mesopotamia or Egypt. On each side of him are his attendants and officials, as well as the leaders of his army. The leaders of the army are dressed in jaguar skins, by the way. Kind of fitting to me anyways. In my brain, it makes sense. I don't know, might just be me. I might have seen the movie El Dorado a few times. Too many times. I like the music. I love Elton John. Good guy. And then down below on the next row, you see, well, the slaves. As they are nude, you can kind of figure out they're lower in society. A lot of them are here begging for their lives. Some of them have already died, such as this one. There's some heads down here. Yeah. But these people, this guy here is even like literally pleading for his life for mercy. All of these figures down here, the army's pushing them in so they don't run away, and they're about to die. I find it really interesting though that they illustrated these things as like a celebratory mural. But we do know a lot about them because of it. Yeah. This one's also on your test. I find this one very interesting as well. So this is from another Mayan people group in a different location, but a kind of similar theme. Another version of welcoming in a son. Unfortunately, it was not Lady Zak's son. Lady Zak was the primary wife of Shield Jaguar, who was the king of the Mayan people in Zakchilan during 725. His minor wife gave birth to a son first, and Lady Zak had to sacrifice some blood or do bloodletting ceremony to celebrate the minor wife's birth of a son. I feel sorry for them. So this is obviously a scene that happened at night. I mean, probably not obviously, but if you know what's happening, Shield Jaguar here, he's carrying a torch. Happening at night. And Lady Zak is down on the ground. And she is placing, it's a substance that the most common thing that we have today is barbed wire. And she is cutting her tongue open with it multiple times. She's like chewing on it. And the blood from her mouth is pouring into this bowl down here. So, yeah. This was a pretty typical ceremony for the other wives to have to perform if one of them had a son. The one that had a son did not have to do this. Lucky her. Maybe, I don't know. Childbirth sucks too.
Either way, there's pain involved. I don't know which one's worse. Childbirth, you were likely to die at this point in history. Cutting your tongue open, probably not. It's infected. Obviously, a relief, sculpture, high relief. We can figure out what's happening thanks to the lovely writing around it in the edges, which is how we even know their name. Now the question for this one was, don't remember. Yes, what individuals are being depicted and what is the activity they are engaging in? I don't think you need me to review that. I told you you'd remember that one. I told you. You won't forget this one. It's going to be etched onto your brain for a long time. Next, we're going into the classic Veracruz. So we're done with the Mayans. Like I said, the Mayans are going to continue making temples for a while, but there's not really a city anymore. The classic Veracruz, however, are the heirs to the Olmec region. They take over after the Olmecs disappear. They create a thriving city. We know that because they had 17 ball courts. Why is that important? Well, El Dorado. So if you've seen that lovely little cartoon, you'll remember a scene in which they play ball. The ball is not kicked with a head or hands or foot, but with your hip. Yes, this is a legit sport that came out of the region. In the Olmec region, Veracruz region, they had abundance of rubber. So they created large rubber balls, not the kind of rubber balls that we have today, but solid rubber. So quite heavy. The players would adorn themselves with hip guards, thank God, which was thick leather material that was kind of wadded up to protect their hips from injury. In the movie El Dorado, it seemed a little bit more innocent. In reality, the losers were usually sacrificed. Oftentimes, people that played in these ball courts were slaves that were forced to play. And the game would be rigged. I thought they rigged it in El Dorado too, kind of. I don't know. Maybe. They cheated with the armadillo. I remember this movie so well. But because the city had so many ball courts, we can determine they must have been a pretty big city with a lot of people. But fun fact, all of the cultures that we've talked about, including the Olmec and Teotihuacan people, had ball courts. So this sport has been around for a very long time. And it's another thing that was picked up by all the other cultures. Don't take the same religion, but to pick up sports and art and social constructs and religion. It's weird. So this pyramid's pretty interesting. The niches do count up to 365, referencing the date in the calendar. They picked up the same calendar that the Mayans had. So as we're coming through this, you're noticing all of these guys are taking from each other, which means obviously they are trading and socializing together, which you're going to see continuing to happen as we get forward. All of them are going to be pretty common. That does take us into the post-classic culture of Chichen Itza. I like them. I just like their name. I can say it. It's kind of fun to say. And then we'll get into intermediate and South America. We haven't even gotten to South America, guys. This is still Central America. I told you this is a longer section. Your book makes it seem very short, but I tried to slow it down and spread it out a little bit to make it make sense. Because as it was so compact in there, I was having issues comprehending, like, what is happening? So I spread it out a little bit. So we are in post-classic Mexico now, but this is still considered Mesoamerica. But I did give it its own little slide because Mexico, we all know Mexico. We are familiar with the landscape, geography, although it does have quite a range of geography, location, and probably a little bit about the cultures that come from there too. So Teotihuacan, we aren't done with it. Just keeps popping up. It's because it was such an important city and it functioned so well. Most people picked up that same city structure. Like I said, around 600, a fire destroyed the city and most people abandoned it. Around that same time, the Mayans abandoned their cities. The period that follows is competition. Everyone is competing for land as the two major civilizations have fallen. Randomly, one from a fire, the other one because they disband. As a result, a lot of militant states emerge, such as the Chichen Itza, the Toltecs, and the Aztecs. We've all heard of the Aztecs. I've heard of the Aztecs. I'm pretty sure you guys have. If you know anything about that, the Aztecs, you know that they're warriors, as are the Chichen Itza and Toltecs. They like to conquer, they like to fight, they like to take in slaves. They do a whole lot of human sacrifices. Yeah. But it's not too different from the last few cultures we talked about, just on a bigger scale. More fighting, more killing. But it makes sense considering the two major cities just now there's a whole power struggle happening. So we are going to be focusing on the Chichen Itza and then we'll get into the Toltecs and Aztecs, but they don't quite come up in the post-classic section yet. So Chichen Itza ends up forming in a northern Mayan city location. Which sounds like it's the northern part of Mexico, but it's not, it's more southern Mexico. It's just, that's the way it sounds. They copy a similar structure to the Mayans for their temples as they copied the Teotihuacan people. So Mayans copied Teotihuacan, Chichen Itza copies the Mayans, and the fact that they create a stone rubble structure and face it with stones. We're going to look at Castillo, which is a 98-foot tall pyramid with 9 levels. It is dedicated to Quetzalcoatl. Again, they give a different name for him in that culture, but he does the same thing. He's in charge of rain and clouds. And just like the Mayans and the Veracruz people, these people are also very concerned with the calendar. This structure does a really cool thing. So during winter and summer solstice, it makes a snake in like a shadow. It's cool. We're going to see it. That's not in the book. I had to find a different picture. It also has 365 steps. If you count up all 4 sides, not like 365 steps tall, but one side, one side, one side, one side. 365 in total. So when I was reading, like I said in your book, it doesn't show the picture of the serpent, which it sounds freaking cool in your book. They mention it like 4 times. And I was hyped to see it. This is the serpent picture over here. So at the bottom of the stairs, there are snake heads, and on summer and winter solstice with the shadows, it does make a snake all the way to the top of the temple. Not as awesome as I pictured it in my head, but still cool. And quite ingenious, like how did they figure out that it would do that? I'm not smart enough to do that. Other than the steps on the side, kind of, you can see how they managed it, but were they building it on the summer or winter solstice and they were like, hey, look, it makes a snake? Maybe. I don't know. But once again, this temple is dedicated to Quetzalcoatl, so we have a snake theme popping up even in this culture this much later from the Teotihuacan people. They are still using snakes as a motif for Quetzalcoatl, which is called something else in this culture. But if you just call him Quetzalcoatl, it's fine.
And here is a far off view from this temple. Once again, underneath this is just a pile of stone, rocks, and pebbles, and then on top is limestone. At the top of this, unlike Teotihuacan, it is not a wooden structure. They copied the Mayan structure of a stone temple at the top. So taking from different people groups. Some more Chichen Itza. I told you we'd get to the astrology tower. I thought this was cool too. It's named as a snail shell by the Spaniards. It actually goes underground. The entrance to it is down below. There's another entrance up here, but if you enter from the lower area in, there's a spiral staircase to the top, which is where it gets its name, snail shell, which is kind of cool. And at the top, most people feel like it was an observatory. As it did have many windows to, well, have great vantage points of the stars and planets. So a temple with 365 stairs for a calendar, and right next to that temple is this observatory. Pretty interesting. Very advanced society, other than the like killing people thing. And I apologize, I'm having fun. I don't get to talk about South American or Central American art ever. It was fun to me. The last bit of post-classic art is also from Chichen Itza. This is the Chacmul. Speaking of human sacrifices, this is meant for human sacrifices. So they had many of these Chacmul statues. Inside of the stomach is a recessed bowl in which they would place the intestines of the people that they sacrificed. And there are many contemporary artists that are very inspired by this, such as Henry Moore. Yeah. I like the Chacmul. I think it looks cool. It looks interesting. It's gross, but it looks interesting. Last bit, intermediate area. We'll probably only look at a bit from this section. Highly developed civilizations located in the Andes Mountains. I think you probably know what people I'm talking about, probably. First, we're talking about the Tairona, but then we will get to thinking of. So the intermediate area of Peru and the Andes, pretty much we're talking about Peru. Tairona people are one of the people groups that looked in or lived there. I only included this because of the movie El Dorado. So it's these people that most historians believe the conquistadors encountered when they thought of El Dorado, as they did have an abundance of gold. This group, this one, not everyone, this one. There's a lot of gold in that area. Yeah. And a lot of their jewelry, sculptures, and artifacts that we have are gold plated. They would even use like the lost wax casting method for gold. Like they would melt it and pour it into mold, which normal societies, you would just plate things in gold. They were legit using it to mold. They had a lot of gold. They knew how important it was though, so they usually only used it for important officials like kings or talismans or relics used in religion. Not just everyone had gold. Then there would be no purpose to it. And in case you're wondering what's happening here, this is a bat-faced man. So another example of a human animal figure. The Tairona people believed that the bat was the very first creature ever created. Weird one. Don't think of a bat, usually. I don't know what I would think is the first creature ever created. Let's end there and say, hey, what do you guys think of as the very first creature ever created?
No.
I've never really thought about that.
Tadpole. Or
Tadpole.
something.
I saw a toad today. He's a baby. He's cute. Tadpole kind of makes sense.
Something so.
Yeah. I don't think of a bat though.
No, that's a complex creature.
Yeah.
That's night vision, all that. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
he uses sound vision.
I don't know what I would think of. I've never really thought of that, but I know it'd not be a bat. Tadpole kind of makes sense. Or like a fish.
Something that doesn't
Yeah.
think. It just
Something very simple.
does- Well, yeah, it just does what it does. It
Yeah.
doesn't have a thought.
Yeah. Like I said, that's where we're stopping today.
There we go.
Tomorrow we're going to pick back up with the intermediate area with, well, actually South American people of the Chauvin, Paracas, Nazca, Mochi, and Sipan people. And then we'll do North America and Africa. Africa's pretty stinking short, mostly because there's no written history of them and we have no clue what's going on there. Huh? It is really cool. But we legit don't know what is going on. Some of the cultures in Africa do keep an oral history, but you know how Chinese know. And a lot of African art was stolen. There were missing good chunks there. Like big chunks. I think tomorrow we skip from like BCE all the way to 1200. In like 2 seconds. Big chunks of it.